Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe. Our headlines this week. Headline number one: for the first time in this presidential election year, Donald Trump has returned to Arizona, holding a town hall style event at Dream City Church in North Phoenix. You know, even though a poll average shows that Trump leads Joe Biden in Arizona by 4.6%. He knows he cannot take Arizona for granted because there are still a lot of undecided voters out there, and he lost Arizona last time around. Headline number two: even though he participated in last week's AZ Political Podcast, Republican Congressman David Schweikert did not participate in his district's Republican primary debate. However, you can watch his Republican challengers, businessman Robert Backey and retired FBI agent Kimberly George, their full debate at KTAR.FM. And headline number three: two big border items this week. First, President Joe Biden signed an executive order that purportedly stops all asylum claims by migrants who enter the United States between legal ports of entry, and the state house voted to put the Secure the Border Act on ballots this November, which would make it illegal to cross into Arizona, a state crime, and allow local law enforcement to arrest illegal border crossers and grant local judges the authority to issue deportation orders. Hopefully, my guest this week on the AZ Political Podcast and shed some light on what effect these actions will have on the border, which is a top issue for voters in Arizona and across the country. Welcome, Sal Macias, who's an immigration attorney and an immigrant yourself.
Yes, I am. I've been in Arizona since I was 4 years old, so I love this state, and it's honestly a pleasure to be here.
All right. Thanks. And by the way, last second, he decided to join us. I can't thank you enough for that. I really appreciate it. So I want to start with the executive order that President Biden issued. Congressman Juan Ciscomani told me this week that there are so many exceptions to the barring of asylum claims that it will have little net effect. And because of its exception for unaccompanied minors, human smugglers could use even more kids as props. Your thoughts?
So I think that, to begin, immigration, in my opinion, should always be handled by the legislative. When it doesn't get passed by the legislative, that's when you have presidents on both sides of the aisle using executive actions to advance their agenda. As far as this executive action, I think that there are many glaring issues with it. I think that if the goal is to prevent undocumented entry into the United States, I don't think it'll actually reduce it. I think it is very symbolic, in my opinion. And in my opinion, there's also a lot of violations. As far as the unaccompanied children claim, I have heard the arguments as to why maybe some of the cartels will start using the unaccompanied minors as a way to circumvent this proposal, this executive order. However, I don't think that was the intention of having that caveat.
No, of course.
The real intention of the caveat is you have a 12-year-old crossing the border,
right,
afraid to go back. You're not just going to toss them across the border and say, deal with it.
Right.
However, I think there are better ways to address this, and I wish people would just speak to each other.
You said it. The legislature, Congress, should be the ones to address this. They can change the law. They can fund the changes to the law, unlike the executive branch, which has a little room as far as, money goes, but nothing like Congress has.
And it gets tiring, Jim. I mean, I feel like every time there's an executive order, it speaks to whichever base it applies. And then a month goes by and then there's a lawsuit. And now it's pending, and it goes to the appeals court, and then semi to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules on it and sends it right all the way back to the first court. And before you know it, there's a new president in town, and then he's like, you know what? We're gonna dismiss the lawsuit, and here we go again. It's exhausting.
And you, in some ways, feel that way personally because of your own situation.
Yeah. So for those of you that are watching and listening, I am a DACA recipient myself. Some of you may have referred to us as dreamers. To put it simply, it means that I was brought to the United States when I was 4 years old. I have lived in this state. I love this state. I love this country. I learned the Pledge of Allegiance in Spanish and in English, and I live by it every single day. for me, I remember being 10 years old when the first draft of the DREAM Act was proposed in Congress, and thinking, oh, this might be a way for me to go to college one day and finally be part of this American story. And here we are, fast forward to me being 33 years old, and it's still on pause, and it's still on hold, and it's tough to plan. But, one thing that I do, the way that I do consider myself an American, is that I always believe that there's a better morning and a better day in the future. And you got to keep pushing forward, even if there are these obstacles.
But you, in some ways, feel like a ping pong ball, depending on who's holding office and which part of their base they're talking to.
And it's crazy how much the players change in this game. I remember at times when it was President Bush who was championing some of these proposals for Dreamers.
Right. Yeah.
The great John McCain, he was one of the most leading advocates of this legislation.
Yeah.
And then, you have the other side. You have President Obama, who promises and promises and promised, and then gets into the office. And I've heard this from one of my mentors, Senator McCain approached President Obama and told him, I have the numbers for you to pass this. Mm-hmm. And President Obama at the time decided to, you know what, I'm going to focus on healthcare instead. I'm going to focus on the recession, which I understand that it applies and affects more Americans. But it's just like there was that window, and here we are still without an answer.
So, we looked at the executive action at the federal level from President Biden. Let's take a moment to talk about if voters enact the Secure the Border law that will likely be on ballots this fall after the state house passed it. Now, there's already been announced. I haven't seen anything actually happen in court, but I know Lucha actually already has said they're going to challenge this. Its ability to even appear on ballots. But if it does pass, ends up on ballots, does pass, are you going to have to go back to school to be an immigration attorney who's now dealing with state law?
No. So the advantage is that I'm an immigration attorney and I'm also a criminal attorney here in Arizona. So when I saw this resolution, I glaringly saw some issues. First and foremost, they allow municipal and local judges to issue an order of removal,
right,
a deportation order. Mm-hmm. For me, the first thing I see there is, okay, so this is a due process issue because someone who's in removal proceedings actually has defensive claims to make. There are asylum, which a lot of people are aware of, but what most people don't realize is that when someone applies for asylum, they can actually apply for two other things that are very similar to asylum.
Really?
Called withholding of removal.
Okay.
And a convention that we signed with the United Nations saying the Convention Against Torture, which says that we have to give this opportunity to an individual to present that they a claim that they may be tortured if they are returned. Local judges are not immigration judges. They are not fluent in that area of the law. And it doesn't sound to me like they will be handling removal proceedings on top of their criminal docket. So I find glaring issues in the Constitution with the enforcement of this action. Additionally, I think funding will be a problem. And then what a lot of people don't realize about this resolution is that there's a small caveat on the end, which says, oh, by the way, the resolution doesn't kick in until a judge or a court determines what happens in Texas with a similar resolution.
Yeah, but it's different enough from the Texas
law that
it's kind of.
So why are we holding off on another state? If we're of the belief of states' rights, why are you leaning on Texas and putting this on hold? If you really think this resolution can stand on its own, separate it. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's even if the voters decide to vote for this and pass it, it doesn't go into effect. And most people don't realize that. And like I mentioned previously, it's going to be the lawsuits. For those of you that were here during SB 1070, you saw how that played out.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think Arizonans are the ones that hurt the most.
I wanted to get your perspective as an immigrant, not just as an immigration lawyer, because my father was an immigrant, came from Jamaica, and I know that a lot of people who went through the rigmarole, the paperwork, the time, the money involved in becoming a legal immigrant to the United States and maybe eventually even an American citizen, are not too happy with the people that they may say jumped the line. And I think it's also very interesting that there's not really a consensus among Hispanic and Latino voters on this issue either.
Yeah, so I, for one, can speak to the bureaucratic red tape that is our current immigration law. I tell people all the time, the last time there was substantial immigration law change was before most households had internet.
Yeah, right.
So you can only imagine how much better we can make this system for a lot of people. I have clients that have been waiting 7 years, 6 years for a resolution on their immigration status. It does cost money. It does cost time. And I understand their frustration. But for the other people that say, why don't they just do it the legal way? And I get that. I hear that all the time. I'm a prime example. If you were to tell me, well, you're a DACA recipient, just apply to become a resident. I'll just give you a quick breakdown of what that means for me. The only person who can petition me currently would be my brother, who is a U.S. citizen. My wife is also a DACA recipient, so I can't help her. She can't help me. I have a daughter who is 6 years old, who can't do anything for me either.
Even though she's an American citizen.
Although she's an American citizen. My brother could petition for me, but just so you guys are aware, that backline and that waiting on visa is currently in 2001. They're processing visas from 2001.
What?
But let's just say, hypothetically, they're like, you know what? Anyone who has been waiting, we're just going to allow them to become immediately available. Well, because of the way that I entered into the country unlawfully, I would have to go to Juarez. What most people don't realize is that in 1996, we passed some of these legislations to bring down unlawful crossings. What one of those bars says, if you've lived in the country at least 1 year undocumented, the moment you touch foreign soil again, you will automatically trigger a 10-year bar.
Yeah.
And the only person who can waive that for you is a U.S. citizen parent or a resident, or a spouse who's a U.S. citizen or resident. So if my brother files for me, not only do I have to wait until that becomes current, but then when I go to that interview, there's going to be another 10-year bar. And if I get lucky, I'll be back when I'm 60.
Wow. So this must just be, I can't imagine being somebody who makes a living off of, let's just be frank here, off the complication that is immigration law, right? That's why I need to hire an attorney if I'm trying to immigrate in the United States. But also at the same time is a victim of all that red tape.
And frankly, I decided to go and become an attorney because I didn't just want to be a victim of these laws. I wanted to be able to read them, to interpret them, to help people navigate it. I mean, on a weekly basis, I have clients who I help become U.S. citizens. I have clients who finally have their green card after 20, 30 years of living in the United States. And every time I see one of them, it's like one more that is able to live this dream that I have. And the time will come. I know it will. I guess it kind of sidetracks here, but there's a scene I watched The Chosen. There's a scene in The Chosen that I forget which disciple specifically it was, but he has a limp. And they're out here, they're curing and healing. And I guess the question is, why don't you heal me? And it spoke to my soul because it was one of those things where like, I may not have what I want. Honestly, I told my wife, when I become a citizen, it's going to be a bigger celebration than our wedding. But I
maybe you should wait till she becomes a citizen
yeah,
too.
Exactly. But I told her, I know I am serving a purpose. I know that I'm helping out. And ultimately, that's what I want to do.
So what would be the ideal set of circumstances, you think, for U.S. and state law, for that matter? Do we need to raise legal immigration levels so that there's less incentive for people to cross the border illegally, and at the same time maybe do more of a crackdown on the border, as far as border security goes? Because even people who are living in the United States illegally, they want to be safe. They want to know that somebody bad is not crossing the border that could do them harm as well, right?
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, this could be a whole seminar, right?
We don't have enough time in this podcast.
There are so many issues. I think what's most important is Our politicians need to get off their high horses and realize that this doesn't mean a win for the other side. This means a win for the American people. And what base can we get at? Whether that's, I know many immigrants, at least in the 90s and early 2000s, their main goal of coming to the United States was, look, there's an opportunity for jobs there, but I love my country. I want to go back and forth.
Right.
So whether that's
a worker program,
whether that's an expansion of the worker program.
Yeah.
Now, one of the unintended consequences of this legislation that happened in 1996 was the restricting the border, is that it made a lot of these immigrants that would rotate realize it's going to be harder to continue to come back. So I'm going to stay, and my family is now in Mexico. So I'm going to ask them to come.
Yeah.
And now we have family units who don't even recognize their home country anymore and actually identify more with the United States. So it's like, what do you do with them? I know that when it comes to restricting border security, a lot of people are talking about their security, and they're afraid of who's coming across the border.
Right.
When I speak to them, I tell them, don't you want to know who's here? Right. I mean, and there's an estimated 11 million people here.
Yeah.
And I can assure you the vast majority of them in a second will submit themselves to a background check.
Absolutely.
If it means that you can recognize them without fear of them being immediately removed. I know that there could be programs such as allowing them some sort of work permit, come out the shadows, kind of similar to like a DACA status. It isn't the ideal of lawful permanent residency or eventually citizenship, or maybe even a caveat. I know my parents, for example, they just want to be able to live and exist.
Right.
You know, U.S. citizenship to them is such a foreign concept to them that it isn't even on their plans. Their children, like me, it is my dream. Right. You know, so how do you address them? I think also, you know, the boogie word, amnesty. We don't grant amnesty, and frankly, I don't care how optimistic I am. I know the word amnesty right now or an amnesty plan is far-fetched, and I can accept that. What I ask people to reconsider and rethink is, look, a lot of these individuals that are currently in our country, they don't need a way to fix their documentation anymore, because many of them have now grown-up children, or they have a spouse a parent. There is now a back of the line for them. What they need is these bars that initially were enacted without them even realizing it. Make them pay. You know, instead of making them pay 10 years living abroad,
pay a fine.
Pay $10,000.
Wow. Pay
$10,000, and I guarantee you those individuals will sell any house, any piece of clothing that they have in order to be able to do it. You're talking about $10,000 times 11 million people in this country who are already part of your life. I'm not asking you to assimilate them. They already build your houses. They already clean your buildings. They already teach your children. They already represent you in court. They're already part of the tapestry. $10,000 times $1 million going directly into helping the American public, that can go a long way.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a lot of ways to
It might even fund
it.
10 minutes of the Department of Homeland Security's operations.
Exactly.
The government eats up money, but yeah.
And in mind, like, okay, you want to talk about how you're going to get the funding for border security.
Right.
There's a great way to build funding.
There you go.
And then obviously there's the distant approach that most Americans don't consider is, why are people coming to begin with? Why are they fleeing? Because there's been a shift between people that are wanting to come for work and people that are fleeing because of persecution.
Yeah, it's just a dangerous place to live,
It's a dangerous place to live. So I'm always wondering, we're so quick to shell out money to Ukraine, so quick to shell out money to Israel. Why aren't we doing more to look at what's happening with our neighbors to the south and seeing if there's ways that we can make life better for them so they don't feel a need to come. Safer for Americans to even travel there, and more opportunities for business investment to go into those areas as well. I mean, I know people aren't as afraid to go to Rocky Point. People love Cancun. I mean, we have all the NBA players going there every summer. You know, it's why can't we do this for more of the Americas? You know, it's a far off approach. I do think that one of the main problems with illegal immigration now is there's a lot of misinformation out there. Who's shelling out that misinformation? I can honestly point to both sides of the aisle. Mm-hmm. You know, you have the Democrats who are saying, well, we need work and we need opportunity here and we have opportunities. You have Republicans who are saying, hey, did you know that your buddy Biden has an open border? Now's the time to do it, because guess what? It causes headlines. It causes all this attention at the border that, look, it's uncontrollable because there's been private people funding money out there, sending all this misinformation and getting these hopes up. I have clients all the time that tell me, oh, I won my asylum claim, so now I need help with this hearing. And I tell them, no, you had a credible fear interview. And that's the reason they're even allowing you to fight an asylum claim. You haven't won anything.
Yeah.
Most of these people, I would claim to say 90% of the people that are coming into this country and are currently fighting an asylum claim will unfortunately be deported and go back.
But we're talking, though, a decade in some cases, though, aren't we? And time enough for people to establish lives, start families, do these other things. It's kind of wrong to give people hope like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in some cases, I have cases that can, at the quickest, are being resolved in a year. But I've had cases that, you know, whether it was because of COVID or because our court system is so saturated that if you finally have your court date, your final court date, and the judge happened to be sick that day, now your hearing has been continued out another 3 years. So we have to address this backlog. I do think it's very ineffective. And I just think that the only way that we can overcome it is by saying, like, look, this isn't going to be a Democrat victory. This is not going to be a Republican victory. This is a victory for the American people. And what does that look like? And realizing that you're not going to get everything you ask for.
Right. Yeah. No, nobody ever does.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks so much, Sal. It was really a pleasure to meet you and learn a little bit about your story. I mean, what a unique perspective. You deal with immigration law, and yet you're kind of in this funky gray area of being a quasi-legal immigrant.
It's one of those weird situations where I fantasize having a factory assembly job, because it means that at 5 o'clock I can clock out and go home. But being an immigrant, being in this political climate, being an immigration attorney, and it's never off. Yeah. It's never off. I mean, I to be honest, I dream about immigration issues. And I hope the answer will come. I am optimistic the answer will come. I just hope that whichever direction the country decides to go in, that we need to leave the pandering and the red meat on both sides to the edges. And let's please solve this. Because it isn't a conservative issue. It's not a liberal issue. It is an American issue. And I think we have the answers, and we have common sense enough for us to respect each other. Unfortunately, it seems that somewhere along the way of having our children educated in a way to know about respect and civic engagement, somewhere between childhood to adulthood, we start telling them that it was all a lie. And I don't think that should be the case. I think that most of us in our hearts want the best for our neighbor, want the best for our state, and want the best for our country.
All right. Hey, Sal, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for joining us on the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.